This next video is for honors only, although if you're CP and you're watching this, feel free to continue. So for this one, I took a problem out of the book. This is actually in your book on page 169, which is still section 3.3. And we're going to do this word problem about basketball, and it has to do with X and Y intercepts. So go ahead, pause, and read through the problem. So once you've read through the problem, we're going to go ahead and work it out. For part A, they first ask you to find the intercepts of the graph of the equation. So remember, to find your y-intercept, you are going to set x equal to 0. You will end up getting 0, 128 when you do that. To find your x-intercept, you're going to set y equal to 0. And when you solve that one out, you will end up getting 64, 0. So that's your first step. Now what you need to do, on any word problem where you're graphing, you're going to have to make sure that you get both of the intercepts on your graph. I actually already pre-drew this graph and the axes because I knew what the x and y intercept were just by looking at it. But just make sure that you get both of them on there. Do not just go by ones as a habit. It's important that you do it and you go by 10s or 20s. And by the way, I made a mistake on this. I should not have started with 10 at the first square. I should have started at the second to keep it even. So on yours, if you want to make it perfect, you can go ahead and start at the second square. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw my intercepts. The first one is at, the x-intercept is at 64, 0. It's about here. That's not perfect, but it's close. The second one is at 0, 128. It's about there. Then draw your line through them. Now, you'll notice that I didn't extend out my arrows of this line. The reason I didn't do that is because actually, if I were to go further to the left, like I just did there, which I'm not going to do, if I were to go like that, that would mean that I was saying that I had negative x values. Unfortunately, I can't score a negative number of field goals, so I can't do that. Same thing, if I were to go further down in this direction, that would be like me saying I scored a negative y, and once again, I can't score a negative number of free throws, so I'm not going to go any further than that. I'm going to stop at these endpoints. Some of these questions will ask you to find the domain in the range. So for this, I'll just write it up top. I didn't actually ask you that, but you might want to just write that out. The domain is that you have to have your x greater than or equal to 0. The range, you have y is greater than or equal to 0. Sometimes it's good just to show that you're not scoring negative values. The next thing I always do on these graphs is I always like to label my axes. So they tell you in the problem that x is the possible number of field goals. So I'm just going to write underneath my axis there, I'm just going to write number of field goals. Or I'll just abbreviate it FG. The other thing they tell you is that your y is the possible number of free throws. So I'm going to write that on the side. I'm going to just write it as number of free throws. So that's going to kind of tell you what's going on in this graph. The next part of this problem, they ask you, what do the intercepts mean in this situation? So let's look at these closely. We have 0, 128. And if you look back up at the stuff that I've underlined in green, they tell you that x is the number of field goals and the y is the number of free throws. So what this means is that these people that scored it got 0 field goals and 128 free throws. So now, that's not a certain thing. We don't know that they scored that much. All this line is telling us is these are all of the possibilities. So this is one possibility that they have. They could have scored 0 field goals and 128 free throws. So that is one possibility. Now, if you know anything about basketball, that's probably not likely, but it is a possibility according to this graph. I want you on your own to see if you can figure out what the Y-intercept means, so go ahead and pause it. So the Y-intercept, 64, your X, is the number of field goals. So they're saying they scored 64 field goals. And the 0, your Y, is the free throws. So 64 field goals and 0 free throws. So sometimes you're going to see a graph like this and you'll have to interpret what the values actually represent. Usually they will tell you what the X and the Y are. There's going to be some where you're going to have to decide what is X and what is Y, but we will get to those a lot later. But for now, just make sure that you read the problem carefully. So for part C, I've actually given you 2 of the 3 possibilities. So one possibility I gave you is that there's 3 possible things that they could have done. They could have done 0 field goals and 128 free throws. They could have done 64 field goals and 0 free throws. The other thing that you can do is to find your third value, or even if you want to use this to find your first and second, you can actually take the equation that you have and substitute in any number that you really like. So let's say I really like the number 10. I'm going to say, okay, what happens if they scored 10 field goals? So let's say that. The way that you would find that, I'm going to put a blank here because we don't know it yet. You can find that by taking that equation. Remember that field goals are your X. You can substitute in 10 for your X and then solve for your Y. When you do that, you find that your Y is equal to 108. So that is our third possibility. And if you want to do that, choose any numbers that you like for X or Y and find the other variable. You can feel free to do that. You don't even need to use the ones that we had already for 1 and 2, but it certainly isn't going to hurt. The last thing that you do, they ask you if the team made 24 free throws, how many field goals were made. So they tell you the free throws are 24. They want to find the number of field goals. So if you look closely at what I've underlined in green in the problem, they tell you that the free throws is the Y. So what that means is we're going to take our equation and we're going to substitute in 24 for Y. Then you just solve the problem. You will end up getting X equals 52. So they made 52 field goals. By the way, as a little problem to take home, I made a tiny mistake on my domain in the range. See if you could figure out what the actual domain and range is. If you come back to me with that answer and show it to me when I check these notes, I will be happy to let you take a sticker.